The afternoon sun beat down on Camp Lemonnier like a physical weight, turning the rifle range into a furnace of concrete and dust. Even the wind off the Gulf of Aden felt hot, carrying the smell of cordite and diesel fuel across the Horn of Africa base. At the far end of the firing line, a group of Marines was making enough noise to be heard over the occasional crack of distant gunfire from the adjacent range. Fresh meat. That's what the older contractors called them. These Marines were barely 3 months past boot camp, deployed to Djibouti for their first overseas rotation, and they carried themselves like they'd already won a war. New desert camouflage uniforms without a single honest stain. Deployment patches on their shoulders that they'd gotten just for showing up. The kind of confidence that came from never having been tested. Corporal Vance was the loudest of them all. 24 years old, squad leader by default more than merit, and the proud owner of 15,000 followers on a social media account where he posted hardcore military content between calls home to his parents. Right now, he had his phone out, filming his guys as they horsed around near the weapons racks, flexing for the camera and trading insults that were supposed to sound tough. "Make sure you get my good side, Corporal," one of them shouted, kissing his bicep. The range belonged to them, or at least they acted like it did. Nobody was going to tell them different. That's when Sarah Kellum came walking up the access road from the Armory Annex. She was easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. Early 40s, small-framed, maybe 5'4" in boots. She wore faded contractor gear, tan cargo pants, and a sweat-stained gray shirt with no unit patches, no name tape, nothing that said who she was or where she'd been. Her hair was pulled back tight, and she moved with the kind of economy that came from being tied more days than not. In her hands, carried with textbook discipline, was an M110 semi-automatic sniper rifle. Barrel pointed down. Safety checked. Grip firm but not tense. She was hauling it back to the armory after a morning qualification shoot. Just another piece of equipment that needed logging and inspection before the next rotation. Vance spotted her from 30 yards out. His eyes lit up the way they always did when he saw an opportunity for content. "Yo, hold up," he called out, already grinning. His squad turned to look. One of them raised a phone. Whoa. That rifle's too heavy for you." Sarah kept walking. Didn't even glance in his direction. Vance jogged to intercept her, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust. "Seriously, let one of my guys carry it before you hurt yourself." He said it loud enough for everyone to hear, his voice dripping with the kind of condescension that was supposed to sound helpful. His squad erupted in laughter right on cue. Sarah stopped, not because she wanted to, because Vance had stepped directly into her path. "I'm good," she said quietly. 2 words. Flat. Professional. The tone of someone who'd had this conversation 1,000 times before. Nah, I insist." Vance reached for the rifle, his smile widening for the camera. "Can't have you throwing your back out. Regulations, you know." More laughter. Someone in the back muttered something about diversity hires. Another voice said admin po just loud enough to carry. Sarah adjusted her grip and stepped around him without another word. Perfect muzzle discipline. Perfect posture. She walked like someone who'd carried heavier things than a 10-pound rifle, and carried them a hell of a lot farther than the 100 yards to the armory. But Vance wasn't done. He followed her, talking to his phone now, narrating for his followers. "Just helped out one of our contractors. Got to look out for the support staff. You know, they are not used to handling real weapons. Bet she's never even fired one," someone called out behind them. The squad dissolved into laughter again, the kind of mean-spirited noise that echoed across the range and made everything feel smaller. Sarah reached the armory window and set the M110 down on the counter with practiced care. The armorer, a bored-looking staff sergeant who'd seen too many years and too many bases, slid a clipboard toward her without looking up. She signed her name in the log, neat, efficient handwriting, and pushed it back. Behind her, Vance was still talking, still performing, still making sure everyone knew he was the loudest voice in the room. Sarah walked away without a word, her boots scuffing softly against the concrete. The heat shimmered off the pavement. The laughter followed her all the way down the road. And nobody, not one person on that range, had any idea who they'd just humiliated. Sarah's housing unit sat at the far edge of Camp Lemonnier, past the rows of transient barracks and the generator yards, where the bass noise faded into something almost like quiet. The contractors called this section the Forgotten Corner, single-occupancy pods for long-term civilians who'd been there so long they'd become part of the infrastructure. Nobody bothered you out here. That was the point. Inside, the space was exactly what the military gave you and nothing more. A narrow bed with sheets she'd brought herself. A wall locker. A desk with a lamp. No decorations except what mattered. On the wall above the desk, a single photograph hung in a cheap frame. Sarah in desert fatigues, maybe 7 years younger, standing with 3 other operators in full kit. The photo had been taken somewhere hot and dusty. Could have been anywhere from Iraq to East Africa. Her uniform patch was blurred out, digitally scrubbed for operational security. The faces of the 3 men beside her had been physically scratched away, their features reduced to smudges of ink and paper. OPSEC rules. Even in memory, some people had to stay ghosts. Next to the photo, a medical discharge certificate. United States Navy. Honorable discharge under medical conditions. The date read 7 years back, almost to the month. On the desk itself, lined up with military precision, were 3 prescription bottles. Names printed in small letters. 1 for PTSD, 1 for chronic pain management, 1 for sleep. The chronic pain medication had been prescribed for shrapnel fragmentation injuries. Left shoulder, left leg, still lodged too deep to remove without risking nerve damage. Somalia, 2015. The kind of wounds that ached when it rained, even in the desert. Beside the bottles sat a shadow box, the kind they give you when you leave. Inside, a folded American flag, the creases sharp enough to cut. A trident pin, small and gold, the mark of naval special warfare. And a commander's coin, lying face down so you couldn't see whose name was stamped on it. Sarah never turned it over. Didn't need to. She knew what it said. The story those objects told was simple if you knew how to read it. Cultural Support Team. CST. A program that didn't officially exist in the public eye but was critical to how Tier 1 units operated in Iraq, Afghanistan, and East Africa during the height of the War on Terror. Women couldn't be SEALs back then. Policy said so. But policy also said male operators couldn't search women and children in villages where intelligence lived behind closed doors and inside family compounds. So the Navy created a workaround. Take female sailors with the right aptitude, put them through a condensed version of SEAL selection, rucking with weight, close quarters combat, advanced weapons handling, high-stress decision-making, and embed them directly with SEAL teams in hostile environments. Sarah had been one of them. SEAL Team 3, Count al-Shabaab operations in Somalia. Her specialty, intelligence collection, interrogation support, female engagement in places where male operators would get doors slammed in their faces or worse. She'd gone into villages where firefights could erupt from any window. She'd sat across from women who knew where weapons caches were hidden. She'd carried an M4 and a sidearm and the weight of knowing that if things went sideways, she was expected to fight just as hard as the men beside her. And she had. Mogadishu, 2015. An operation that was supposed to be routine. Grab a mid-level al-Shabaab facilitator. Get out clean. It went sideways in the worst way. IED ambush on the exfil route. 2 SEALs down, 1 unconscious, 1 with a femoral bleed that would kill him in minutes. Sarah had been 20 feet away when the blast hit. She'd taken shrapnel to her shoulder and leg, felt the hot punch of metal tearing through muscle, and then moved anyway. 11 minutes. That's how long she'd stayed in the fight, dragging the unconscious operator to cover, applying a tourniquet to the other while rounds snapped overhead, returning fire with her non-dominant hand because her left shoulder wasn't working right anymore, calling in A support, keeping both men alive until the quick reaction force arrived with medical. Her chain of command recommended her for a Navy Cross. The citation was already written, but somewhere up the line, someone decided that the operation was too classified, the unit too sensitive, the optics too complicated. The recommendation was quietly downgraded to a Silver Star. Still an honor, still rare, but not the same. The 2 men she'd saved went back to their teams after recovery, finished their careers. Retired with pensions and pride. Sarah got a medical discharge, a handful of pills she'd take for the rest of her life, and a contractor position at a base where nobody knew her name. She fixed weapons for Marines who thought she'd never fired one. She hauled rifles for corporals who filmed her for laughs. The world saw a middle-aged woman in faded contractor gear. The truth was a warrior the system had used, honored in private, and then forgotten the moment she stopped being useful. She didn't talk about it, didn't wear the trident, didn't pull out the shadow box to show people what she'd earned. That wasn't how quiet professionals operated. You did the job, you carried the scars, and you moved on. But the scars didn't fade, and neither did the muscle memory. Vance's video hit the unit group chats within an hour. By morning formation the next day, it had spread to 3 other Marine companies, the Navy detachment, and half the Air Force logistics squadron. Someone added text overlay, "Range Karen can't handle a rifle." Someone else turned it into a meme with crying laughing emojis. By the second day, guys Sarah had never met were sharing it on their personal accounts, tagging friends with comments like, "This is why we can't have nice things and diversity hire of the year." The joke had legs. That's what made it worse. Sarah heard it everywhere. Whispered comments at the PX when she was buying toiletries. Smikes from passing Marines who'd elbow each other and glance her way. In the chow hall, a table of contractors, men she'd worked alongside for months, started making exaggerated groaning sounds when she walked past carrying her tray, pretending to struggle under the weight. One of them offered to carry it for her. His buddies laughed into their food. She never reacted. Not once. Just kept her head down and did her job. Inventory the weapons. Run diagnostics on the optics. Log serial numbers in the system. Check headspace and timing on the crew-served weapons. Fill out maintenance reports. Sign off on call sheets. The work was methodical, repetitive, the kind of thing you could do on autopilot if you'd done it long enough. But the toll was visible if you were watching close enough. The way her jaw tightened when someone made a comment just loud enough for her to hear. The way she avoided eye contact in crowded spaces, moving through the base like she was trying not to be seen. The way her hand would drift up to her chest sometimes, fingers touching the fabric where a trident pin used to sit, before she'd catch herself and drop it back to her side. She'd survived worse than mockery. She'd survived actual combat, actual wounds, actual loss. But there was something uniquely exhausting about being dismissed by people who had no idea what they were dismissing. It wore you down in ways that firefights didn't. Vance, for his part, was just getting started. He started showing up at the armory during her shifts. Not to do work. He didn't have any reason to be there. Just to perform. He'd lean against the counter while she was running inspections, making comments loud enough for the junior enlisted troops waiting in line to hear. "You know how to field strip that? Or should I show you?" he asked once, watching her work on an M4. Sarah didn't look up, just kept her hands moving. "I'm serious," Vance continued, pulling out his phone. "Not trying to be a dick, but like, we can't have people working on weapons if they don't know what they're doing. Safety issue, you know?" A lance corporal in line snickered. Vance grinned at him, then turned the camera on Sarah. She finished the inspection, logged the serial number, and moved to the next rifle without saying a word. Vance filmed it all, posted it later with a caption about making sure our support staff stays safe. Got 300 likes. Another time, she was explaining a safety correction to a private first class who tried to turn in a weapon with a round still in the chamber. Basic mistake. Happened all the time with new troops. Sarah was walking him through the clearing procedure, chamber check, magazine out, visual inspection, when Vance appeared beside them. "Actually," he interrupted, "the way we learned it in MCT." "I know how you learned it," Sarah said quietly, still focused on the private. "This is how it's done, hey." Vance laughed. "Just trying to help. No offense, but some of us have actual trigger time." The private looked between them, uncomfortable. Sarah finished the safety brief and sent him on his way. Vance stayed, scrolling through his phone, making sure she knew he wasn't intimidated. But there were people watching who saw more than Vance did. An older Navy Master Chief named Rains, passing through the army to coordinate a training evolution, noticed the way Sarah moved. The economy of motion. The way she kept her back to walls and tracked every person who entered the space without seeming to look at them. The way she walked, weight forward, knees slightly bent, ready to move. It was subtle. Most people wouldn't catch it. But Rains had spent 25 years around operators, and operators moved different than everyone else, even years after they'd left the teams. He didn't say anything, just filed it away. A staff sergeant from the Marine Security Force saw her working late one night, going through a routine inspection on a rack of M4s. She field stripped one in 23 seconds flat, her hands moving in a blur. Bolt carrier group out, gas tube check, chamber inspection, reassembly. She wasn't even looking at it. Just muscle memory, the kind you built through thousands of repetitions. The kind you didn't get from a weekend training course. The staff sergeant mentioned it to a buddy later. The buddy shrugged. Probably just watched a YouTube video or something. At Sarah's workstation, tucked behind a stack of parts catalogs, there was a faded sticker someone had tried to scrape off years ago. If you looked close enough, you could see the shadow of what it had been. A trident, the eagle and anchor and pistol barely visible through the damage. Nobody looked close enough. The days blurred together. The mockery became background noise. Sarah kept working, kept her head down, kept surviving, the way she'd always survived. Until Vance pushed it one step further. He submitted a request through his platoon sergeant for a unit bonding training day, live fire drills at the range, stress shoots, team building exercises. The kind of thing young Marines loved because it meant trigger time and a break from the monotony. His sergeant approved it without much thought. Then Vance added a special request. He wanted Sarah Kellum assigned as the range safety officer for the evolution. She works the armory, he explained to his sergeant. Good opportunity for her to get some real experience. See how we do things downrange. What he meant, what everyone in his squad understood when he told them, was one more chance to put her in her place. One more chance to show her she didn't belong. One more chance for content. His sergeant signed off on it. The request hit Sarah's supervisor's desk the next morning. Her supervisor, a retired Army warrant officer who'd long since stopped caring about base politics, forwarded it to her with a one-line note. Range SO duty, Friday 0800. Confirm. Sarah read it in her housing unit that night. The assignment was clear. The intent was clearer. She typed back a single word. Confirmed. No argument. No pushback. No complaint. Just another mission. Another shift. Another day of being the quiet professional in a world that only respected the loud. She'd show up. She'd do the job. And whatever Vance had planned, she'd handle it the way she'd handled everything else since she'd left the Navy. With silence. And competence. And the kind of patience that only came from knowing exactly who you were, even when nobody else did. Friday morning came in hot and bright. The kind of East African heat that made your uniform stick to your back before you'd even finished breakfast. Vance's squad assembled at the range by 0800, hyped up and loud, treating it like a field trip instead of live-fire training. They'd drawn ammunition the night before, 500 rounds of 5.56, belts for the sore, enough to make noise and feel dangerous. Sarah arrived 10 minutes early, carrying a range safety kit and a radio clip to her belt. She took up position behind the firing line, binoculars around her neck, a clipboard in her hands. Safety officer. Observer. There to make sure nobody did anything catastrophically stupid. Vance saw her and grinned. All right, everyone, gather up, he called out, waving his squad over. Before we go hot, we're going to have our safety officer here give us a quick brief on basic range protocol. He gestured at Sarah like she was a visual aid. Ms. Kellum's gonna make sure we don't hurt ourselves. Isn't that right? A few of his Marines snickered. One of them muttered something about needing a babysitter. Sarah stood silent, clipboard at her side. Vance kept going, talking to her like she was a child who'd wandered onto a military installation by accident. So basically, when we're on the line, weapons stay pointed downrange. That's toward the targets, not sideways or up. When we're not shooting, we keep our fingers off the triggers. That's this part here. He mimed it for her, exaggerating the motion. And if you hear anyone yell ceasefire, that means stop shooting. Pretty straightforward stuff, but I know this might be new for you. More laughter. Someone had their phone out, recording. Sarah looked at Vance for a long moment. Then she turned to the squad. When you're ready, take your positions. Weapon stays on safe until I call the line hot. Anyone breaks safety protocol, we shut it down. Clear. Her voice was flat, professional, completely unremarkable. Vance shrugged and waved his guys forward. You heard the lady. Let's show her how Marines do it. The drill started simple. Static targets, timed engagements, basic marksmanship. Vance had set up a stress-fire course. Multiple silhouettes at varying distances, timed reloads, simulated contact scenarios where they'd have to move between shooting positions. It was meant to feel tactical, meant to look good on camera. But from the first volley, Sarah could see they were sloppy. Poor muzzle discipline. One Marine swept his barrel across the line during a reload. Another let his weapon drift up while he was talking to his buddy between engagements. Rushed reloads, magazines dropped in the dirt, bolts not fully seated. And Vance, instead of supervising, was filming himself with his phone, narrating for his followers like he was running a masterclass instead of a Bella-controlled chaos drill. Sarah watched through her binoculars, taking notes. Every safety violation, every missed check, every moment where someone could have put a round somewhere it shouldn't go. Her jaw was tight, but she said nothing. Not yet. The drills escalated. Fire and movement. Bounding Overwatch. The Marines were getting excited now, yelling between shots, hyping each other up. The range was loud. The crack of rifles, the snap of rounds hitting distant berms, brass clinking against concrete. Then Private Hollis brought out the M249 saw. Squad automatic weapon. Belt-fed, gas-operated, designed to lay down suppressive fire. Hollis was young, maybe 20, and clearly excited to be the guy running the big gun. He set up on the line, fed the belt, and started sending rounds downrange in controlled bursts. 30 seconds in, the barrel started to glow. 60 seconds, and smoke was rising from the gas tube. Hollis had been firing too fast, too long, without breaks. The weapon was overheating. Barrel change. Vance yelled from behind his phone. Just like we practiced. Hollis rushed it. Sarah saw the problem immediately. Through her binoculars, she watched him pop the feed tray, pull the hot barrel, jam the new one in place. But he didn't seat it properly. Didn't check the headspace and timing, the precise measurement that ensures the bolt locks correctly and the weapon fires safely. He just slapped it in and kept moving, eager to get back to shooting. Sarah keyed her radio. Cease fire. All weapons safe. Cease fire. Her voice cut through the noise, clear and direct. Hollis hesitated, looking back at Vance. Vance waved a hand dismissively. It's fine. He knows what he's doing. Continue. Sarah's voice came louder this time. Cease fire. I need to inspect that weapon before. Jesus Christ. Vance interrupted, not even looking at her. We're in the middle of a drill. Hollis, you good? Yeah, Corporal, I'm good, Hollis called back. Then light it up. The crowd was watching now. Other Marines on the range. A few contractors. Everyone could feel the tension. Safety officer versus squad leader. And Vance wasn't backing down. Hollis looked down at the saw. Checked the belt feed. Thumbed off the safety. Squeezed the trigger. The weapon exploded. Not a Hollywood fireball. Real malfunction. Catastrophic failure. The receiver cracked with a sound like a sledgehammer hitting metal. Hot gas vented backward through the feed tray, blowing it open. The bolt sheared off, sent metal fragments spraying across the line. Hollis screamed, a high, sharp sound of pain and shock, and dropped the weapon, stumbling backward. His hands were already blistering. The skin on his right palm burned red and black. Blood ran down his face from superficial shrapnel cuts across his cheek and forehead. Brass and twisted metal scattered across the concrete. The saw lay on the ground, smoking, its receiver split open like a gutted fish. Two Marines on either side of Hollis dropped their weapons and froze. One of them was shaking. The other just stayed, his mouth open, like his brain couldn't process what had just happened. Vance stood there, his phone still in his hand, screen dark. His face had gone pale. The range descended into chaos. Shouting. Confusion. Someone was yelling for a medic. Hollis was on the ground now, clutching his hands, blood running between his fingers. Another Marine was backing away from the line, eyes wide, breathing too fast. And Sarah moved. Not rushed. Controlled. Deliberate. She crossed the 30 feet between the safety position and the firing line in seconds, her voice cutting through the panic like a blade. Cease fire. All weapons safe. Clear your chambers now. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order, delivered in a voice that every person on that range instinctively recognized as command. Not contractor voice. Not quiet civilian voice. Operator voice. The voice of someone who'd given orders under fire and expected them to be followed immediately and without question. The Marines responded on instinct. Safety's on. Chambers cleared. Weapons down. Sarah dropped to one knee beside Hollis, her hands already moving. She didn't hesitate, didn't flinch at the blood or the burns or the way he was gasping for air between sobs of pain. She'd done this before, done it in worse conditions, with worse wounds, when the difference between fast and slow was the difference between life and death. Look at me, she said, her voice firm but calm. Look at my eyes. You're okay. I've got you. Hollis locked onto her face, his breathing ragged. Sarah's hands moved with practiced efficiency. Airway, clear. Breathing, fast but steady. Circulation, pulse strong, no arterial bleeding. The shrapnel wounds on his face were superficial, already clotting. The burns on his hands were first degree, maybe second in a few spots, but nothing that would take him out permanently. She'd seen Marines take sucking chest wounds and keep fighting. She'd held pressure on femoral bleeds while calling in air support. This was bad, but it was manageable. She keyed her radio with one hand while keeping pressure on Hollis's worst burn with the other. Range 2 to medical. We have one Marine down with burn injuries and superficial shrapnel wounds. Stable but needs immediate transport. Over. The response came back in seconds. Medical was rolling. Sarah stood, scanned the line, and started barking orders. You establish a perimeter. Nobody comes on this range until I clear it. You collect every piece of brass within 10 meters of this position. Tag it for investigation. You account for every Marine on this line. Names and status. Report to me in 60 seconds. The Marines moved. They didn't question, didn't hesitate. They just moved because the woman giving orders knew exactly what she was doing and they were smart enough to recognize it. Sarah walked to the destroyed saw, crouched down, and examined it without touching. Receiver cracked. Bolt sheared. Feed tray blown. Catastrophic failure due to improper headspace and timing after barrel change. Textbook malfunction. Textbook course. The kind of thing that happened when you rush procedures that were designed to be done carefully. She pulled out her phone and took photos from 4 angles. Evidence for the investigation. The medical team arrived. 2 corpsmen with a stretcher and a trauma kit. They moved to Hollis, assessed him, confirmed Sarah's initial evaluation. Stable. Transportable. They loaded him up, and one of the corpsmen glanced at Sarah with something that looked like professional respect. Good work, he said quietly. Sarah didn't respond. Just stepped back and let them do their job. 90 seconds. Start to finish. From chaos to controlled scene. From panicked Marines to organized response. From catastrophe to containment. She turned and walked back to the safety position, picked up her clipboard, and started filling out the incident report. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was calm. She'd been here before. Different country, different circumstances, but the same muscle memory, the same training, the same instinct that didn't fade no matter how many years you spent hauling rifles for people who thought you'd never fired one. Behind her, Vance's squad stood in silence. Nobody was talking. Nobody was filming. Nobody was laughing. They just watched a contractor, a middle-aged woman they'd been mocking for days, respond to a live emergency with the kind of precision and authority that most of them wouldn't develop in years of service. She'd taken command of the range, stabilized the casualty, secured the scene, and coordinated medical response without breaking stride. Vance still stood where he'd been when the weapon exploded, his phone hanging limp in his hand, his face the color of old paper, his mouth open like he was going to say something, but nothing came out. Sarah finished the first page of her report and glanced up at the silent line of Marines. "Range is closed pending investigation," she said, her voice back to its usual quiet, professional tone. "Clear your weapons, turn them in at the armory, and wait for your squad leader's instructions." Nobody argued. They just moved, quiet and subdued, the swagger gone. And for the first time since she'd arrived at Camp Lemonnier, Sarah Kellum was no longer invisible. The range stayed locked down for the rest of the day. Yellow caution tape across the access road. MPs posted at the entry point. Hollis was at medical getting his burns treated and his face stitched up. Painful but not career-ending. Vance's squad had been dismissed, sent back to their barracks to wait for whatever came next. The destroyed saw sat tagged and photographed in an evidence locker, waiting for the formal investigation that would determine exactly how badly someone had screwed up. Sarah sat at a picnic table outside the armory, finishing her incident report in the fading afternoon light. Her handwriting was tight and efficient, each line of the form filled out with the kind of precision that came from writing hundreds of these over the years. Time of incident, nature of malfunction, actions taken, casualties, recommendations. She didn't editorialize, didn't point fingers, just documented what happened in clear, factual language that would stand up to any review board. She was 3 pages in when she heard footsteps on the gravel behind her. Sarah Kellum. Not a question, a statement. The voice was older, gravelly, carrying the weight of someone who'd spent decades speaking and being listened to. Sarah didn't look up, just kept writing. The man sat down across from her without asking permission. She could see him in her peripheral vision, Navy working uniform, Master Chief anchor on his collar, salt and pepper haircut high and tight. Mid-50s, maybe older. The kind of weathered face you only got from spending half your life in places that age you faster than normal. "You're not going to remember me," he said, leaning back against the picnic table. "But I remember you." Sarah's pen kept moving across the page. Mogadishu, the Master Chief continued. 2015, operation near the stadium. You pulled Marino and DeGrasse out of that kill box after the IED hit. Sarah's pen stopped. She still didn't look up, but her hand had frozen mid-word, the tip of the pen pressed against the paper hard enough to leave a small ink blot. "I was part of the quick reaction force that came in for extract," the man said, his voice quieter now. "Master Chief Rains, SEAL Team 8, running security coordination for the pullout. I saw you working. Saw you take shrapnel and keep fighting. Saw you drag 2 full-grown operators to cover while taking contact from 3 directions. Saw you refuse medevac until every single operator was accounted for and loaded." Sarah's jaw tightened. Her hand trembled slightly, just enough to make the pen shake. "You got a Silver Star for that," Rains continued. "Should have been a Navy Cross. Everyone on the ground knew it. But the brass had politics to play. Classification concerns. Didn't want too much attention on CST operations. Didn't want to open up the whole debate about women in combat units. So they downgraded it, put you in for a star, and hoped it would be enough." For a long moment, Sarah didn't move, didn't speak, just sat there with her pen frozen on the page and her eyes locked on words she wasn't reading anymore. "That was a long time ago, Master Chief," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not long enough that you forgot how to run a hot range better than any Marine instructor I've seen in 5 years." Rains glanced toward the closed-off range, toward the spot where Hollis had gone down. "Those kids have no idea who they've been disrespecting. They don't need to know." Sarah's voice was flat, controlled. "I'm just a contractor now." "Bullshit." The word hung in the air between them. Not angry, not harsh, just honest. Rains pulled out his phone, tapped the screen a few times, and slid it across the table. Sarah finally looked up. The screen showed a military service record, partially redacted, black bars over sensitive unit information and operation details, but enough visible to tell the story. Cultural Support Team. SEAL Team 3 attachment. Multiple deployments. Combat Action Ribbon. Silver Star. Purple Heart. Medical discharge with full honors. That video Vance posted. Rains said. The one where he's mocking you at the range. It made its way to the senior enlisted network. Some of us old-timers started asking questions. I made a few calls, pulled some strings. He tapped the phone. Turns out you're not just some contractor who wandered onto a base. You're a decorated combat veteran who saved lives under fire and just prevented a catastrophic range disaster through the exact kind of crisis response that special operations units spend years drilling into their people. Sarah stayed at the screen, at her own face in a service photo from a decade ago. Younger, harder, different. I'm filing a formal commendation for your actions today, Rains said. Proper paperwork, through proper channels. And I'm recommending Corporal Vance for disciplinary review for ignoring a range safety officer's direct ceasefire order and creating the conditions for that malfunction. He paused. He endangered his Marine. He endangered everyone on that line. And he did it because he was too busy playing for a camera to do his job. Sarah finally met his eyes. He's going to hate me even more. He's going to learn respect, Rains corrected. The hard way, the kind of lesson that sticks. He stood up, tucking his phone back into his pocket. You don't have to wear the trident anymore, Kellum. You don't have to tell war stories or prove anything to anyone. But you also don't have to let punk kids treat you like you're nothing. You earned your place. You earned your rest. And you sure as hell earned the right to be treated with dignity. He nodded once, a small gesture, but one that carried weight. Respect between professionals. Recognition between people who'd been there. Then he walked away, his boots crunching on the gravel, leaving Sarah alone with her incident report and her memories. She looked down at her hand. It was still shaking, just slightly. The emotional dam hadn't broken. She wouldn't let it. Not here, not now. But it had cracked. Just enough to let something through. Something that felt dangerously close to relief. She finished the report in silence. Signed her name at the bottom. Closed the folder. The sun was setting now, painting the base in shades of orange and red. Sarah stood, tucked the folder under her arm, and started the walk back to her housing unit. The word traveled fast. That's how military communities worked. Information moved through networks faster than any official communication channel. By evening formation, every senior NCO on Camp Lemonnier knew the story. Not the mocking video, not the jokes, the truth. The quiet contractor woman was a decorated CST operator who'd served with SEAL teams in some of the most dangerous operations of the War on Terror. She'd saved lives under fire in Mogadishu. She'd taken shrapnel and kept fighting. And today, she'd prevented a range disaster through the kind of combat-tested crisis response that most Marines wouldn't develop in a full career. The story spread through the chow hall, the barracks, the command centers. It moved through unit group chats with screenshots of her service record. It reached the ears of officers who should have known better than to let contractors get disrespected. It reached the ears of senior enlisted leaders who'd spent their own time downrange and recognized exactly what kind of professional Sarah Kellum was. Sarah was halfway back to her housing unit when she saw them. A group of Marines from Vance's squad, standing outside one of the transient barracks. 5 of them, still in their utilities, talking in low voices. They saw her coming from 50 yards out. The conversation stopped. Sarah kept walking, her eyes forward, her pace steady. She'd been here before, walked past groups of people who were talking about her. She knew how to keep moving. But this time was different. The Marines didn't laugh, didn't smirk, didn't elbow each other or pull out phones. They just stood there, watching her approach, and something in their posture had changed. The swagger was gone. The arrogance was gone. What was left looked like uncertainty mixed with something else. Shame, maybe. Private Chen stepped forward as Sarah drew level with them. He was young, maybe 22, with a face that still looked like it belonged in a high school yearbook. He'd been on the firing line when the SOAR exploded. Seen the whole thing from 10 feet away. He didn't salute. She was a civilian now. Protocol didn't require it. But he stopped in front of her, met her eyes, and nodded with something that looked like genuine respect. "Thank you," he said. His voice was quiet, serious. "For Hollis, you probably saved his life. Or at least saved him from a lot worse." He swallowed. "And I'm sorry. We didn't know. About you. About any of it. We shouldn't have treated you that way." The other Marines nodded. One of them looked like he wanted to say something too, but couldn't find the words. Sarah looked at Chen for a long moment. She could have said a lot of things. Could have lectured them about respect. Could have told them exactly what she thought of their behavior. Could have made them feel smaller than they already felt. But that wasn't who she was. Take care of your body, she said simply. And next time someone tells you to cease fire, you cease fire. That's how you keep people alive. Chen nodded, his jaw tight. Yes. Sarah walked past them, her boots scuffing against the concrete, her pace unchanged. But something had shifted. She could feel it in the way her shoulders straightened, the way her chin lifted just slightly, the way the weight she'd been carrying, the weight of being invisible, dismissed, mocked, had lightened just enough to let her breathe a little easier. She wasn't the same person she'd been in Mogadishu. That version of her was gone, buried under shrapnel scars and medical discharge papers and 7 years of hauling rifles for people who didn't see her. But she was still Sarah Kellum, still a cultural support team operator who'd earned her place in rooms where most people would never be allowed. Still someone who'd proven herself when it mattered most. Still a quiet professional, even when the world only rewarded the loud. And now, finally, she wasn't invisible anymore. The ghost had a name again, and the people who mattered were starting to see it. 2 weeks passed, and Camp Lemonnier settled back into its rhythm. Missions continued. Rotations came and went. The East African sun kept beating down on the ranges and runways, indifferent to the small human dramas playing out below. But something had shifted. Corporal Vance received a formal reprimand. Not because of the video, though it had been quietly deleted from his accounts, but because his negligence had nearly killed one of his Marines. Ignoring a range safety officer's direct ceasefire order, failure to supervise proper weapons handling procedures, creating conditions that led to a catastrophic malfunction. The paperwork was clear, the consequences unavoidable. He lost his squad leader position, got bumped back to regular line duties, and spent his remaining months at Lemonnier keeping his head down and his mouth shut. When he saw Sarah around the base, he took different routes. Didn't make eye contact, didn't film, didn't perform. Some lessons you only learn the hard way. Private Hollis recovered. The burns on his hands healed with minor scarring. The shrapnel cuts on his face faded to thin lines that would probably disappear in a year or two. He stopped by the army one afternoon while Sarah was working, carrying a folder of paperwork under his arm. He said, standing at the counter, "I wanted to thank you for what you did. I know I screwed up out there." Sarah looked up from the M4 she was inspecting. "You learned from it. That's what matters." Hollis nodded, then hesitated. "I'm putting in a packet. For reckon. Don't know if I'll make it, but I figured I should at least try." "You'll make it if you want it bad enough," Sarah said. "Start running with weight now. Get comfortable being uncomfortable. And remember, selection doesn't care about how loud you are. It cares about whether you can do the work when nobody's watching." Hollis's face shifted, something clicking into place. "Yes, I'll remember that." He left with his paperwork, walking a little taller. Operator to future operator. No speeches, no grand gestures. Just the kind of advice that stuck because it came from someone who'd lived it. Sarah's daily routine didn't change. Same job, same contractor clothes, same housing unit at the edge of the base. She still hauled rifles and ran diagnostics and filled out maintenance logs in her tight, efficient handwriting. Still kept to herself, still avoided crowds, still carried the weight of old injuries that ached on cold mornings. But now, when she walked through the chow hall, Marines nodded as she passed. Not exaggerated, not performative, just the small acknowledgement that one professional gives another. Senior NCOs stopped to talk shop, asked her opinion on weapon systems, shared stories from their own deployments, treated her like what she was, someone who'd been there and understood the cost. A few female service members approached her over the following days, asking careful questions about CST selection, about what it was like being a woman in special operations spaces before it was officially allowed, about how she'd handled the pressure and the doubt and the constant weight of proving herself in rooms that didn't want her there. Sarah answered honestly. No sugarcoating, no pretending it had been easy. But she also didn't tell them not to try. The military was different now. Doors were opening that had been closed for her generation. The women who came after her would have chances she never did. Just remember, she told one young lance corporal who reminded her of herself at that age, the only opinion that matters is the one you have of yourself. Do the work. Earn your place. The rest will follow. She didn't seek attention, didn't wear her trident pin, didn't tell war stories at the smoke pit or try to relive old glories over beers at the exchange. That wasn't who she was. Quiet professionals didn't need to announce themselves. They just showed up, did the work, and let their actions speak when it mattered. But she was no longer invisible. The people who mattered, the ones who understood what quiet professionalism actually looked like, they saw her now. Not as a contractor, not as a diversity hire or an admin pogue or someone who needed help carrying a rifle. They saw her as what she'd always been, a warrior who'd earned her place in the hardest way possible and never stopped being one, even after the uniform came off. One morning, before the base fully woke up, Sarah stood alone at the range during sunrise. The air was still cool, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink over the distant desert. She was running routine maintenance on a rack of M4s, her hands moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this thousands of times. Disassemble, inspect, clean, reassemble. The rhythm was meditative, almost peaceful. Her hands were scarred, small white lines across her knuckles from old impacts. A burn mark on her left palm from a hot barrel years ago. Calluses in all the right places. But they were steady. Expert. The hands of someone who knew weapons the way a surgeon knew scalpels. She worked in silence, alone with her thoughts and the distant sounds of the base coming to life. No cameras, no audience, no need for validation. Just a professional doing professional work, the way it had always been done. Back in her housing unit, on the wall above her desk, the shadow box sat where it always had. The folded flag, the trident pin, the commander's coin, still face down. Morning light filtered through the window, catching the gold of the trident and making it gleam for just a moment. A reminder, not of what was lost, but of what was earned. What could never be taken away, no matter how many years passed or how many people dismissed what they didn't understand. There are warriors who shout, who perform for cameras and collect followers and measure their worth in likes and shares and public validation, who need the world to see them, to acknowledge them, to constantly remind everyone of what they've done. And then there are warriors who serve in silence. The ones who've proven themselves don't need to remind you. They've already done the work, already paid the price, already earned what no amount of arrogance can buy: respect. Not because they demanded it, not because they fought for it in comment sections or group chats, because they lived it every single day, in the shadows, in the forgotten corners, in the places where the real professionals operate. Sarah Kellum was one of those warriors. Always had been, always would be. And now, finally, the people around her knew it too. If you've ever been underestimated, ever been the quiet professional in a room full of noise, ever carried scars that nobody saw and earned respect that nobody acknowledged, this story is for you. Drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. We see you, and we know what quiet professionalism really means. The ones who know, and that's all that matters.